A king whose own body was rotting from the inside still climbed into the saddle, faced Saladin, and won. That is the image people remember. The miracle. The Leper King who humiliated the most feared Muslim commander of his age. But that is not why Baldwin of Jerusalem still feels so powerful. He matters because the victory was real, and still not enough. He beat the storm, and could not stop it. He saved his kingdom more than once, and all he really bought was time. And time was the one thing his own body was already losing. The warning came early. As a boy, Baldwin did not react to pain the way other children did. His tutor noticed it first. Other boys flinched. Baldwin did not. That strange numbness turned into a diagnosis that, in his world, sounded less like an illness than a sentence. Leprosy. Not just suffering, exposure, decay in public. A slow destruction of the body that everyone around him would watch in real time. Then his father died, and that sick boy was crowned King of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was not a throne built for weakness. It was a frontier kingdom held together by faith, garrisons, cavalry, money it never had enough of, and nobles who could be loyal one month and poisonous the next. It had prestige, but prestige did not hold castles, water horses, or stop invasion. A king there could not survive on ceremony. He had to judge men quickly, command under pressure, and make the right decision before panic spread faster than the enemy. And the enemy Baldwin faced was not some reckless raider. It was Saladin. Calm, patient, disciplined. A man doing what the Crusader States had dreaded for decades. He was turning divided Muslim power into coordinated force. Egypt and Syria were moving under stronger control. That changed the map. A fragmented enemy could be endured. A unified one could break Jerusalem slowly, then all at once. Baldwin understood that before many healthy men around him did. That is what made him dangerous. Not pity, clarity. He saw something else too. Jerusalem's weakness was not only military, it was political. Saladin could recover from a setback. Jerusalem could not recover so easily from bad leadership, vanity, or feuds among its own nobles. Every mistake cost more. Every reckless commander was more dangerous. Every succession problem was a doorway through which disaster could walk. And because Baldwin was visibly doomed from youth, the court was already infected by the question nobody could ignore. What happens when the king dies? That question poisoned everything. Baldwin was still young, but no one expected him to grow old. Every faction knew it. Every marriage mattered more. Every alliance carried the smell of inheritance. Men did not only look at Baldwin as king, they looked past him, toward the vacuum his death would create. That meant he had to fight on two fronts at once, against Saladin at the border and against ambition inside his own court. Then came the invasion that should have broken him. Saladin moved against the kingdom with a force large enough to make the situation look hopeless. Baldwin was young, badly outmatched, physically compromised, and ruling a state with little room for error. This was the kind of campaign in which frontier kingdoms usually start to die. First panic, then hesitation, then scattered responses, then collapse. Baldwin chose the one option that could still shock the situation back in his favor. He moved fast. That decision was everything. He did not sit behind walls and wait for fear to spread. He gathered what men he could, including the hard-striking mounted core of the kingdom, and went to intercept. It was not heroic in the abstract. It was necessary in the most brutal sense. If he gave Saladin time, Jerusalem would bleed before the real battle even began. Then came Montgisard. This was not a neat contest between equal powers. It was a violent reversal. Saladin's army was confident, stretched, and expecting a weaker enemy to crack. Instead, Baldwin hid it before the invasion settled into certainty. and Baldwin himself rode with the army while carrying a disease that would one day leave him almost blind and barely able to move. There was nothing symbolic about that ride. It was pain, strain, urgency, and refusal. The attack landed. The Crusaders smashed into an army that believed the outcome was already decided. Saladin was driven into retreat. The sick king won. That should have been the ending. It was not even close, because Montgisard did not solve Baldwin's problem. It exposed it. One extraordinary victory had interrupted the avalanche, but it had not removed the mountain above it. Saladin learned. He adapted. He kept building power. And Baldwin's body kept collapsing. That is the darker truth behind the miracle. The kingdom had survived not because it had become secure, but because one dying ruler had forced a moment of impossible resistance. And the disease did not stop to honor what he had done. It kept taking from him. His sight worsened. His strength declined. His mobility faded. The king who had ridden into one of the great battlefield shocks of the age would eventually need help to mount, help to travel, and help to function. Every year he remained politically central became more impressive and more dangerous, because Jerusalem depended on a man who was literally disappearing in front of it. That dependence is the heart of the story. Baldwin was not just protecting Jerusalem from Saladin. He was holding back the full consequences of everyone else's weakness. He had to command armies, but he also had to read men. Which noble was loyal? Which one was vain? Which one was brave but foolish? Which one would gamble the kingdom for prestige? A healthier king might have handled that over decades. Baldwin had to solve it while dying. That is why the clean legend is too clean. Baldwin was not merely tragic and noble. He was hard, suspicious, increasingly severe. He had to be. He understood that Jerusalem could be killed not only by enemies beyond the frontier, but by stupidity inside the palace. So he fought when he had to, accepted truces when he had to, and tried to preserve the kingdom with a discipline many around him did not share. Less careful men could call restraint weakness. Baldwin understood it as arithmetic. Jerusalem did not have endless treasure, endless cavalry, or endless recoveries. Then the succession crisis sharpened. His sister Sibylla was no longer just family. She was the path to the throne after Baldwin. That made her marriage a strategic event, because the man attached to her might inherit the whole crisis. And this is where the story stops being a battle tale and becomes something worse. Baldwin was no longer trying to win a glorious future. He was trying to stop the wrong man from inheriting apocalypse. That is why Guy of Lusignan mattered. Guy was not some theatrical villain who arrived with doom written on his face. That is exactly what made him dangerous. Kingdoms are often not destroyed by obvious monsters. They are destroyed by men who seem acceptable until pressure reveals what they really are. Baldwin came to distrust Guy deeply. He saw the possibility of weak judgment at the exact moment weak judgment would be fatal. So he tried to limit him, tested him, pulled back from him, tried to keep the kingdom from sliding into careless hands. By then, Baldwin was winning less through physical presence and more through raw intelligence. His body was failing, but his political instincts were growing sharper and colder. By the end, his decline was impossible to hide. Blindness advanced. Weakness deepened. Public life itself became an act of endurance. Yet even then, he kept thinking ahead. He had his young nephew crowned during his own lifetime, a grim attempt to reduce the chaos that would follow his death. Think about how desperate that is. A dying king still on the throne, already building barriers against the disaster he knows may begin the moment he is gone. Then he died, and the speed of what followed became the final proof of his greatness. The child king did not live long. The court fractured harder. Sibylla rose. Guy returned to power. The restraint Baldwin had imposed began to dissolve. And once that happened, Jerusalem lost the one man who had consistently judged both Saladin and the kingdom's own fragility with enough realism to keep them from colliding in the worst possible way. Now the structure had to stand without the man who had been holding it together. It could not. The years after Baldwin reveal the full meaning of Baldwin. Men less capable than he was inherited a crisis they did not understand. Where he had recognized limits, they leaned toward posturing. Where he had used war carefully, they drifted toward decisions that confused honor with strategy. In a stronger kingdom, that kind of arrogance might have been survivable. In Jerusalem, it was lethal. Then came Hattin. Not under Baldwin. After him. That is everything. At Hattin, the Crusader kingdom made the kind of catastrophic decision Baldwin had spent his life trying to prevent. The army marched into terrible conditions, pushed by pressure, drained by thirst, and exposed to an enemy who knew exactly how to exploit exhaustion and fear. It was trapped, broken, and ruined. The military heart of the kingdom was destroyed. The road to Jerusalem opened. Saladin took the city Baldwin had spent his life protecting. And that is why Baldwin still matters. Not because he saved Jerusalem forever. He did not. Not because suffering made him pure. It did not. Suffering usually makes people harder, colder, and more exact. Baldwin became all of those things because he had to. He was a king trying to outgovern his own mortality, while staring at an enemy who could smell weakness from miles away. For a few impossible years, he succeeded. That is the final weight of the story. Baldwin did not defeat history. He held it off. He was the human barrier between Jerusalem and the future that finally arrived after his death. His victories were real. His intelligence was real. His will was real. And the collapse that came after him is the clearest measure of what he had been preventing all along. Sometimes one person really is the wall. Baldwin was that wall. And when he finally fell, everyone behind him learned how much had been leaning on him the entire time.